Today, I have the pleasure to present Dr. Joseph Gerson, who is president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, and was a member of the Nihon Hideyanko Nobel Peace Prize delegation in December of last year. He has served as co-chair of the Committee for Sane U.S.-China Policy and served as vice president of the International Peace Bureau, vice president of the Nobel Peace Prize recipient organization and the International Peace Bureau, and also as director of programs and disarmament coordinator of the American Friends Service Committee's Northeast region. He was co-founder of the United for Peace and Justice Coalition, and he has often delivered keynote speeches in Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the annual World Conference Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs. Dr. Gerson did his undergraduate work at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and received his PhD in politics and international security from the Union Institute and College. His books include Empire and the Bomb, How the U.S. Uses Nuclear Weapons to Dominate the World, The Sun Never Sets, Confronting the Network of U.S. Foreign Military Bases, The Deadly Connection, Nuclear War and the U.S. Foreign Military Intervention, and With Hiroshima Eyes, Atomic War, Nuclear Extortion, and Moral Imagination. His articles have appeared in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the Boston Globe, Eurasia Review, Common Dreams, Truth Out, and other publications. With that, it's my pleasure to present Dr. Joseph Gerson.
Thank you, Fred. I guess I jump in here as I begin.
Yeah, can I remind everyone if they have questions to hold your questions till the end? If you're online, you can use the chat function anytime to type your question in, and Joseph will respond to the questions after his presentation.
Thank you, Don. So I want to begin by thanking Ben Wang for arranging this. I'd love to be with you, but I've got a grandson I've got to get to college later this afternoon. And as I begin, I just wanted to appreciate the Humanist Association here. The older I get and the worse the situation becomes here in the United States, the more I find myself identifying and embracing the work of Baruch Spinoza. And I just would commend reading about and of Spinoza as you can. That was essentially 4 centuries ago, but it really applies now. So I'm going to give you some version of U.S.-China Relations 101. It'll take me a little while. I ask for your patience, and I'll try to move through it as expeditiously and accessibly as I can. So wish me luck with the technology here. Like we're going to go with it, not exactly the format I wanted, but it looks like it will work.
You click on from the beginning.
Slideshow from the beginning. That does it. Thank you so much. I'll pass on my history of the technological skills here. So I want to kind of root us in kind of the fundamental nature of the situation that we face. Joe Nye, who was number 3 in the Pentagon and principal author of U.S. Asia policy in the Clinton and less so in the Obama administrations, wrote that twice in the 20th century, tensions between rising and declining powers led to catastrophe. And he said it's our responsibility to prevent that threat from happening again. Some of you will have read in recent years about the Thucydides trap, in which, in more cases than a few, the tensions between rising and declining powers have led to catastrophic war. The other is from Samuel Huntington, not a known liberal or humanist, wrote that the West won the world not by superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by superiority in applying organized violence. Westerners often forget this fact. Non-Westerners never do. And with China's military rise at this point, that superiority is increasingly in question. I went, as was mentioned before, I went to Georgetown University for my undergraduate studies. I was a classmate, among others, of Bill Clinton, Gloria Macapagal, and others. I was sort of this middle-class Jewish kid from New Jersey in this Catholic environment. But I remember very well the second sentence from my sophomore professor of international relations. He said, the study of international relations is analogous to studying the rules of the game among mafia families. This does not apply to all international relations, but as we look at great power relations these days, it certainly does. At Georgetown, I had the privilege and challenge of studying evolution of civilizations with Carroll Quigley. Clinton was a member of my class, and when he got the Democratic nomination back when, the one professor he honored was Quigley. Quigley is sort of in a competition with Toynbee. And he had this theory in which he said that new civilizations rise on the periphery as peripheral nations create new syntheses of their traditions, but absorb what can be learned from other and more advanced cultures. And in many ways, I think this helps us to explain China's rise. He also said that and insisted on us when analyzing civilizations to analyze them on 6 interrelated levels of power and development: economic, intellectual, military, political, social, and spiritual. And at various times in history, one of these forces will be more dominant than others. I think we can argue these days whether it's economic or intellectual. But clearly we're in a situation being massive change being driven by changes within these sectors. We also live in an incredibly dangerous moment. More than a few international leaders have pointed to the parallels between today's time and the years leading up to the First World War. Basic elements you see here: competition between rising and declining powers, complex and uncertain alliance systems, economic interdependence and competition, territorial disputes, arms races with new technologies, and wild card actors, not the least being, shall we say, Trump himself or Lai in Taiwan. We have this competition for supremacy on all these levels. I won't go into detail here. But also, you see the photograph on the right, an illustration of drone swarms. And as we're seeing now with the Ukraine war, so much of this on the daily basis has to do with the changes in warfighting technology and doctrines, as I said, on a daily basis. And this certainly applies to the situation in East Asia as well. Those of us who are old timers need to begin to accept and learn and engage with the reality that China has in fact risen. And you can see that's Pudong, part of Shanghai there on the left. And the Belt and Road Initiative, both across land and at sea, has really built this massive economy. I remember it's probably 20 years ago or more. I was at a conference in Korea, and a Swedish diplomat projected a map of Eurasia, which basically showed a rail line going from Korea across China to Europe, and in his case, ending in Sweden. And what he said was, as this rail line is built and developed, reinforced, you're going to have massive economic transport across it, which will more deeply integrate these cultures and societies, but also ideas and alliances will grow as well. We've been seeing this happen over the last 30 years or so. There's the kind of American jingo belief, certainly among MAGA people, that America is the best, it's always been the best, and blah, blah, blah. The reality is that China's national capacity in many ways now exceeds that of the United States. The world has changed. So its gross domestic product now exceeds the United States by a considerable amount. Its manufacturing capacity, as we know, is massively better. Its military spending, when allowed for purchasing power, is almost the same. The number of patents it has, academic publications, academic citations, all exceed those in the United States. I mean, you're dealing with a society of what, 1.4 billion people as compared to the United States. And as there is education and infrastructure, they can build on it. You also have the situation in which the United States, especially under Trump, is alienating much of the world, not the least being tariffs. And as Bill Clinton used to say, it's the economy stupid. Is the U.S. is undermining these countries' economies as well as its own. It undermines U.S. influence and power around the world. You may remember it was about a week or so ago in Georgia, more than 300 Korean workers, many of whom had operative visas at the time, were arrested, handcuffed, and imprisoned, and taken back to Korea yesterday. I've been in correspondence with friends in Korea who say, they're all in shock. The profound wound and schism here that's not going to be easily healed. Trump's foreign and military policies. I'm part of what's called the Track Two process. I'm the one who's different from everybody else. Former arms control negotiators, some generals, diplomats, analysts from Russia, Europe, and the United States. And just after Trump won the election, a kind of leading Russian asked the leading American, well, how great is this change and what are Trump's priorities? And in terms of change, the American, I say it's confidential, so I can't name names. The American said, well, this is probably on a par, with the Civil War, the New Deal, the Civil Rights struggle. And also wanted to say that, the first priority of the Trump administration is going to be enriching the Trump family and its key political allies. And we've been watching this in a way that makes Teapot Dome look like nothing. Its kind of ideological foundation is basically white supremacist doctrine. It's it's interesting in relationship to China, as I'll explain, is uncertain quite where we're going to go. But he may be seeking grand bargains with both Russia and China. When I first heard that he was obsessed with getting a Nobel Peace Prize, I thought it was ridiculous. But that's in fact true. And we could be surprised if they are able to somehow end the Ukraine war on reasonably decent terms, that we could find some resumption of arms control diplomacy. And of course, the other part here is the kind of smash and grab part of Trump's foreign policy. I think Greenland, Canada, Gaza, Panama, and we may be at war with Venezuela before very long. So what is sovereigntist policy? Sovereigntism means a country doing what it wants within the limits of what it can do. It means the end of self-restraint within a framework of mutual restraint. And it means indifference to the behavior of other states or how cruel or dangerous we are, as long as it doesn't impact us. Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian and political philosopher, said it means the strong doing whatever they can and the weak suffering what they must. And this is clearly what we see in the Trump administration. On the economic level, we're in a situation where you recall Trump initially put massive, 145% tariffs against China, and the Chinese retaliated with embargo on exporting rare earths and rare earth magnets, all of which are essential to kind of the new computer information age technology. And then we saw both sides back down. Basically, it's a kind of playing words here, but MAED, it's mutual assured destruction at an economic level. And so what we may be seeing at this point is an effort to be decoupling to the degree that each side can, but at the same time trying to establish some economic guardrails so that neither society or economy totally fails. But we're also in a situation, and I'm no big cheerleader for empire, but watching the United States decline and go down as it is disturbing, especially if you have kids or grandkids. So, we're seeing with the Trump administration attacking the institutional foundations of the rule of law, tariffs that alienate the rest of the world, the assault on science, the attacks on academia, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, anti-immigrant policies, which are devastating the economy. And, we've got Gestapo-like masked men in our communities kidnapping people, sending them off to prison, sometimes in places that they've never been or, on the other side of the world from where they were born. The protectionist economy, the rule of by fear and kleptocracy, and all of this opens the way for greater Chinese influence. China selling itself as the increasingly the guarantor of international stability. There were reports in the last couple of weeks that Trump and Xi in China are in the process of trying to put together a summit where they would establish maybe some guardrails and the hierarchy of power, define it a little bit more. So the reality is, psychologically, I think we need to say that Trump admires Xi as a great man, a man who changes the world, a deal maker, what Trump has ambitions to become. Maybe to try to limit the competition, rare earths and semiconductor access. Possible. We've been living through a bit of a truce on tariff increases that may continue. It's worth noting, too, that Taiwan's president, Lai, had planned to stop over in New York, and he was denied access, denied landing rights, largely because I think Trump didn't want, or whoever's behind Trump, didn't want to create a new and deepening crisis with China. As we read about what might come out of it, there's a sense that we have an urgent need for negotiations around guardrails on artificial intelligence. The fears that our species may lose out to artificial intelligence. Certainly, massive disasters can be created through AI. And there's a need, obviously, common security need to find compromises there. And you can see the different elements here that will be a part of the negotiations, disciplining the rivalry, refraining from targeting non-military sectors, like rare earths, for example. How to deal with Ukraine. It's worth noting that while Ukraine has provided economic and limited military support to Russia in this war, the Chinese have never been enthusiastic or supportive of the conquest or annexation of other countries. Their approach, as I'll say later, is rather more subtle. And both Korea, although that may be increasingly impossible. And of course, Taiwan is at the center. It's at the hinge of everything. Our societies are different. We have different historic cultures. In the United States, we're still a relatively young country at 250 years, and has basically pursued initially manifest destiny to conquer the continent, and then Western hegemony. Beginning, I remember it was Jules Davis was a professor of U.S. diplomatic history. And I remember his lectures about the 1890s when we had a massive Great Depression with farmers and others, industrialists calling for new markets. Through the 90s, Roosevelt, Mahan, and McKinley, Cabot Lodge had all built a navy to compete with Britain's, and you had the beginning of what our textbooks call the U.S. imperial age. They only gave it 2 years, 1898 to 2000, when we conquered Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, Guam, and so on. But we've had a more sophisticated form of global hegemony, certainly since 1945. On the other hand, this should be 5,000 as opposed to 500 years of history in China. typos are us. And their approach has been, to recognize on the one hand the sense that they've, for most of recorded history, been the leading culture and society and economic development in the world. And their kind of foreign policy ambitions, their efforts of control have been not through direct empire building, but rather more through blanking on the word here, old age sets in. But it's basically payments. It's a much more subtle arrangement, and not direct control as the U.S. has done. If you've been following the news at all, you know that central to Chinese political culture has been trying to overcome 150 years of humiliation, which included, the Opium Wars, written and to a lesser extent the United States, basically sending in troops to make it quite legal to sell opium to the Chinese people as a way of dealing with balance of payments problems. And then the carving up, certainly, of the eastern coastline of China by imperial powers. Say the Chinese see a picture here of their foreign minister, Wang Yi. Their perception and their policy has been to, condemn hegemonic forces, another word for the United States, to a lesser degree Japan, trying to block China's perceived rightful place in the world. And especially as we've been watching what Trump has been doing, they reiterate that they seek to uphold the UN-centered international system, to work for a more just international order, not to provoke, but to encourage multilateralism, to encourage free trade, and to foster a non-discriminatory environment for international cooperation. They project themselves as the anchor for international stability and equitable trade. And to a large degree, this is true. Here in the United States, this is a quote from Michael Waltz, who was the former, Trump's initial second administration national security advisor. The perception that China's military buildup is comparable to the Nazi Germany's in the 1930s. Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan are all dominoes. So we're back to the domino theory, at least on the much of Trump's foundation, much of the MAGA world. China has indeed massively increased its military capabilities over the last 30 years. Conventional weapons imbalance is changing, and there's increasing equality. China is increasingly able with missiles to challenge the U.S. Seventh Fleet, which has basically dominated Asia Pacific now for 80 years. It's increasing its nuclear arsenal at a tune of about 100 new nuclear weapons a year. And the goal seems to be parity with the United States and Russia. And that makes arms control negotiations that much more complicated. People in the Track 2 system that I'm part of talk about three scorpions in a bottle. And, that's part of our existential situation. Their Navy is now larger than that of the United States, and their capabilities are quite real. If you go back actually to the Obama administration, remember we had the pivot to Asia, the recognition that the global economy in the 21st century be increasingly driven by the economy of the Indo-Pacific region, and the goal to reduce U.S. Military commitments to Europe and the Middle East, and to concentrate our course of control in Asia Pacific. And you see Trump kind of following through on this with his challenges to NATO, demands that they pick up more of the military spending against Russia in order that the United States can better focus on China. And this is a quote here from the Biden national security strategy. Over the years, actually beginning with the Spanish-American War, the conquest of the Philippines, the United States has built what the Biden administration called a lattice work of alliances across the Indo-Pacific, with bases. I mean, when I first went to Japan, 1984, I was stunned to learn that the United States still had about 100 military bases and installations across Japan. If you look at the U.S. Declaration of Independence, it will tell you that with Britain maintaining standing armies in our communities during times of peace, they committed abuses and usurpations. And that was one reason for declaring independence and actually going to revolutionary war. And abuses and usurpations are, to say the least, common, and not only here in East Asia, but wherever foreign military bases exist. The United States has many more times foreign military bases than any other country. But militaries are militaries, and abuses, environmental, criminal, sexual violence, and so on, are just inherent to the presence of foreign military bases. So here a little bit on the alliance structures themselves. The U.S.-Japan military alliance imposed by the United States in 1952 as a secret requirement to end the military occupation has been kind of the foundation of U.S. Asia-Pacific dominance, along with the Seventh Fleet. And you can see the other countries that the United States has alliances with. And interestingly, increasingly, NATO is a global alliance with European warships going through the Taiwan Strait and joint military exercises in the South China Sea. So the U.S. and Chinese imperial ambitions, and I will refer to what China's done with its 9-dash line here as imperial. They clash, as you can see, in the first island chain, which basically goes from Korea all the way down to Vietnam, and further to the east, anchored here by Guam. And China has felt contained, excuse me, by the bases and alliances the United States has along its eastern coast here, which is where its industry and commerce are concentrated. And as they built their navy, they've been trying to find a way to break through more into the open Pacific. Taiwan here serves as sort of a plug, and it makes it sort of the hinge of the whole U.S. imperial system. And you can see here on the right, China's 9-dash line. Basically, their claim to about 80 to 90% of the South China Sea, with the people in the Philippines referred to, at least in part, as the West Philippine Sea. And it's been a site of many military confrontations. Interestingly, in the last few weeks, what we've seen is Trump moving away from free trade, I guess from the beginning, with his tariffs, but also with his taking or demanding stock and ownership or partial ownership in a number of major corporations, including around chips. We see part of that competition moving in a way similar to what China has done with the form of state capitalism. I think one of the differences is that I don't think that the Trump people necessarily have the skills. We've not been impressed with the ability or confidence of people in the Trump administration. So where this is going to lead, we don't know, but it doesn't look good. Here's something on China's global reach. On the one hand, as I mentioned before, you have the Belt and Road Initiative, but its approach has been, in some ways, parallels. For example, the Marshall Plan and USAID before Trump took it out. So you have the BRICS, which is now over a dozen countries, initiated by Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And it's not a military alliance, but certainly they seek where they have common interests. especially in trade, but also, diplomatic cooperation. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has been advertised in the United States as a military alliance. It's not, but it is a form of building alliance with increasing numbers of countries participating in it, and basically a new sort of informal international or somewhat formal international alliance structure. Alliances don't necessarily have to be all military. And you have, obviously the joint naval operations between Russia and China, with North Korea getting involved as well. Chinese have built bases where they've sort of seized little islets or even made them in the South China Sea. And there are ways, you can see one of the bases here on the right, a way to try to break the U.S. stranglehold on the first island chain and just beyond. And part of the capacity with missiles and otherwise to take out U.S. ships. At the same time, as I hear from some people in the Pentagon, the sense is that these would go in the first hour of a military confrontation. If we wait a whole lot longer, they'll simply be swallowed by the rising sea. But China has also built, so you can see what's called a string of pearls, which is basically a set of very few bases, but access agreements to ports, basically leading through the Malacca Strait and over to the Arab Peninsula. And interestingly, with Trump's incredibly stupid 50% tariffs against India, we saw Modi go to China to celebrate, to mark the 80th anniversary of the end of Japanese war in China, and he didn't stay for the military parade, but it shows, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we're not making friends. And Taiwan, as I said before, is the hinge of all of this. It's the most dangerous place on Earth right now. Maybe for the moment, Gaza and South Sudan, but potentially, in terms of its global dimensions, Taiwan. From the Chinese perspective, it's a continuation of the unresolved civil war. It was the KMT, the all warlord parties that were defeated in the Chinese Revolution, who fled to Taiwan and had their independence or their separation from China reinforced in the earliest stages of the Korean War by the Seventh Fleet. Whoops, let me go back to where I was. Sorry about that. We've had tensions over offshore islands. It almost came to nuclear war a couple times on that. But beginning in 1972, with the U.S. and China mutual recognition, we've had 3 communiques, basically which the United States recognizes that there's only one China. Following that, right-wingers in Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act that basically says we'll defend Taiwan. We had a major crisis in 1996 again, when in the run-up to elections in Taiwan, China, and this is a long time ago, different military capacity, they bracketed North and South Taiwan in the ocean with missile demonstrations to show the vulnerability. And the United States, and they communicated both sides. The United States sent 2 nuclear capable aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits. This frightened the bejesus out of the Beijing leadership and really spurred their massive military development. And at the same time, there were messages from China saying that we recognize that you value Los Angeles more than Taiwan. And now, this day, the U.S. is arming Taiwan to be what's called a porcupine, to be able to resist a Chinese invasion or occupation. you kind of see its location here. And there've been numerous Chinese interventions, mainland Chinese interventions into the coastal waters claimed by Taiwan. Little quick history. Um, Taiwan was basically a fishing site. It was populated by indigenous peoples. The Portuguese set up a colony there. The Dutch then took it over. A Chinese pirate uh, took it back for himself and for China, long under the Ming Dynasty rule. Japan seized it in 1895 in the Sino-Japanese War. Sought to develop as sort of their model colony. Ruled it, for what, 50 years. And so you have now, essentially more than 100 years of Taiwanese separation from mainland China. So that's impacted the development of its culture. And when Chiang Kai-shek came to Taiwan, he brought with him a brutal, absolutely brutal totalitarian society. But that changed in the late 1980s. And you do have a democratic culture there, which makes the whole situation that much more complicated. The Chinese government has been consistent in saying that it's Taiwan is part of China. The One China policy reaffirms that. And if Taiwan takes irreversible actions toward declaring its independence, then China will not be limited to nonviolent diplomatic forces to win the reintegration into China as a whole. The Chinese have tested the demarcation line, and we're getting mixed signals here from the Trump administration on what its relations with Taiwan are and will be. So, just after the inauguration, the U.S. sent warships through the Taiwan Strait to kind of say, we'll defend it. We've had massive economic investment commitments from Taiwanese corporations, especially the semiconductor industry. And just ironically, we know that the semiconductor manufacture requires a lot of water. And where are these big factories being built? In Arizona, where we have serious water problems. The brilliance of some of this just is staggering. The question is whether the U.S. would basically when Biden was moving for his nuclear posture review, the question was whether the United States would maintain its first strike doctrine. And just to appreciate that since Nagasaki, the United States has prepared and threatened to initiate nuclear war 30 times during international crises and wars. And the question was, Biden had previously said that that the nuclear weapons the sole use should be for defending, defensive, not first strike attacks. But Dan Ellsberg, who some of you will be familiar with, predicted that Biden wouldn't abandon the first strike nuclear doctrine because the thought was it was the only way the United States could ultimately defend Taiwan. That wouldn't defend Taiwan. It would lead to the end of human species. And as I said before, as Trump and China have been engaging in somewhat complex diplomacy, the outcome of which we don't know, Lai had wanted to do transit through New York and was denied access. But we do have, for example, here's the head of the Republican Foreign Relations Committee in Taiwan with President Lai just at the time of his inauguration. So the ties are deep. China has perceptions of U.S. nuclear threats. You'll see on the right here the list of times the United States has prepared and threatened to initiate nuclear war against China. I mentioned before seeking parity. And then probably not high on your list of things you've been reading about lately are the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands, in the East China Sea between Japan and China. There, who ultimately has sovereignty over them is an open question growing out of the Second World War. And you've had, as you can see in the picture on the right, intense competition between Japan, China, and Taiwan over sovereignty there. And the reality that an incident or an accident there could easily escalate into a massive war, especially as the United States has said that Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan military alliance means that we'll defend Japan's right to control administration of those uninhabited islands. Just to say that, you know, there's an obvious necessity. You have read, I'm sure, about the naval tensions on the far end here of the 9-dash line as Chinese ships have ventured into and seized shoals in what are clearly Philippine territorial waters. And it's come close to live fire responses, but certainly intense water ways to limit the Philippine military. And we have increasingly now U.S.-Philippine military cooperation, more weapon systems, more troops to the Philippines. Then as we move here to close, you know, some of you will remember that the Cold War, United States and the Soviet Union, ended on the basis of common security. You know, the Palmer Commission in growing out of Sweden and Europe brought together leading figures from the United States and the Soviet Union and Europe as we were in a spiraling arms race that, you know, the fear of which many of you will remember. And the idea that you could not obtain security in competition with your rival, that you could only develop security through difficult, intense diplomacy that addresses the mutual needs of all sides. And a number of us have been working in this area with partners across Indo-Pacific. Last October, we issued a report on what common security might look like in the Indo-Pacific region. And you'll see the list here where the United States needs to reaffirm its recognition that China has a right to develop, the need to halt nuclear arms races with verifiable no first use agreements, halt the arms race, reduce military exercises, recognize the need for economic stability from across the region, including the United gathering States, actually in Berlin, and rather more, which brought together. You can find that leading Asian port peace and justice movement figures, but also webpage from Europe as well in the United States to explore how we might build common security. So I'll end there. I hope I didn't put too many of you to sleep, and look forward to your questions.
Very interesting. Thank you much. I was struck by, as much as I disagree with the current administration's policies in many areas, they do seem to, despite their apparent blundering, they are trying to do something to equalize or normalize U.S.-Chinese relationships.
Yeah, so we'll have to hope that progresses. I mean, the forces in Washington are varied and complex. So we need to be encouraging. We need to be encouraging that.
Yes, I had a question for you. That an acronym you used, MAPA, M-A-P-A. Either I missed the definition or didn't know it. I don't know. So
I sort of created that one. M-A-D. We know from the nuclear arms race, mutual assured destruction, and we now are in a situation where we have mutual assured economic destruction, and you know this hopefully leads to some mutual self-discipline in the economic competition between the United States and China.
But what I asked was what about M-A-P-A?
MAPA. I'm sorry. Is that MAPA? MAPA is Massachusetts. Massachusetts Peace Action. I don't know how I got into this there.
Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. Did have a few questions that have come in chat. Andy made the comment that China is often called communist China. How would you describe China's economy?
Yeah, well, I said along the way that Trump is increasingly uh, imitating uh, Chinese state capitalism. So on the one hand, you do have a Marxist-Leninist party that is, the control is intense. What we take, what we until Trump took for granted in terms of our freedoms of thought and expression are not allowed there. But since what they called the opening, under Deng Xiaoping, and the welcoming of foreign corporations and then the development of a Chinese capitalist society, it's increasingly, I would say, a state-run, a state capitalist society. And what we've seen is, in some ways, it's at least in some dimensions, it works better than ours. And you have now a reality in which many developing nations and others are looking to the Chinese model and thinking, well, maybe this is a bit better than the U.S. model. I think one of the things that we don't understand sufficiently is how the 2008 economic crisis really shook the world tectonically. A recognition that Western capitalism, free market capitalism, could collapse, right? I mean, Obama saved the capitalist system. And what we see with the Chinese is with increased state involvement, basically a way to maintain that system and make sure that the economic system is consistent with the both the domestic and foreign policy aims of the government. As I said before, the Trump administration is so deep into crony capitalism that I don't have great confidence that the Trump administration is going to improve our economy.
Andy had another question. He asked, are you saying that China does not have free access to the Pacific Ocean through the South China Sea, and that this is the reason it is building up its island bases and attempting to extend its economic coastal zone? And then there's
Yeah.
a follow-up. Do the Filipinos agree with this?
Yeah. So if you look at the world from a Chinese perspective, the last almost 200 years, the threat of foreign intervention and invasion has come from the sea. You go back to the Opium Wars, you think in terms of the Japanese, you think in terms of the Seventh Fleet in Taiwan. So this is their preoccupation. I mean, they did have a brief border war with Russia back, 1968, 69. Similarly, a brief war with Vietnam, but that was not under threat of invasion. So their primary strategic concern is the protection of their coastal areas, which are where you have the biggest concentration of its economic wealth and power. So yes, that's their concern is that the U.S. could strangle China from the sea, and it explains the massive Chinese naval buildup to try to offset that threat.
Uh, Rob had a question. Has the recent purchase of BlackRock of more than 40 ports around the world made any difference in Chinese control of global shipping, or is it just a drop in the bucket?
Um, I'm not really in a position to answer that well.
Okay.
I wish I could, but I'm not in a position to answer that well.
Okay. Fred had raised his hand and had a question. Fred, can you want to ask your question?
Yes, this is kind of not really about China, but it's peripheral. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the fact that Trump, with his tariffs, is certainly alienating China and many other countries, including India, and driving India to closer relations with China. And the fact that China has always had a better relationship with Russia than we do, and his cutting off the USAID, uh, giving China an opportunity to step in and get better relations around the world, especially in Africa. I'm wondering, given that Trump's appearance of being stupid if he may, in fact, be fulfilling Putin's agenda in a way.
Well, this is an open question, uh, uh, and I was talking with the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize last week, and it's something I haven't had a chance to check out. But he was saying that back when Trump was listed as an asset for Kazakhstan's intelligence agencies, I don't know. One of the questions is, what does Putin have over Trump? The other part there is two elements here. I think one of the things that you see, well, on one hand, kind of a white supremacist dominant, U.S. dominance role or ideology rather, and that's what they're pursuing, right? Their priority. There's a member of the Senate, in the last 2 weeks, who gave a speech in which he said, "Look, this country was settled by European whites. It was created for European whites. They shed their blood to take over the frontier, and this is he said our country. I'm not one of them." And so this is part of what's driving, this self-destructive, nationally self-destructive course, right? There's also, you can see it in an issue of foreign affairs shortly after Trump came back to power, a perception that the future global order or disorder will be organized around blocks. Basically a block in the Americas, maybe linked to Europe, a Chinese block, a Russian block, and who knows what happens with Europe. At the moment, Europe is functionally totally subservient to the United States. But you see again the Trump ambitions, right, in Panama, in Venezuela, in Greenland. So this is driven by, I think, a self-destructive ideology, and as I indicated in that one slide, we're moving really quickly toward a very serious decline, and with the military and ICE in our communities, one of the questions is going to be, to what degree are we able to continue to have some form of democracy and democratic freedoms? I mean, the 2026 elections are going to be absolutely essential. We're going to fight over them already with the gerrymandering that's going on. And among the things I'm looking at, is Kennedy's assault on vaccines, the fact that COVID seems to be coming back, the health system is being seriously and savagely attacked. If we have we're also facing obviously the increased unemployment, and we could see a convergence of growing economic employment, inflation, and disease that could mobilize the country to take it back from Trump. We'll have to see how that plays out. Maybe we'll live through it.
I hope. Okay, I had another question from Andy. Could you comment on the U.S. involvement in liberating China from Japan during World War II?
Yeah. You did have throughout the war U.S. support for the nationalist forces, basically the KMT, nearly a warlord kind of grouping. You had a number of you had the flights over the Himalayas to supply them. I would say that was not central to the war. I mean, to appreciate that the Japanese had their eyes on, and I was just reading. I'm reading at the moment a biography of Tojo, but you go back to early 1920s when the Japanese took Japanese ambitions and intervention were frequent and brutal. I mean, when I was a 7-year-old kid, my father had this book, Life Magazine's Pictorial History of the War. And as a 7-year-old kid, the image in that book that absolutely haunts me to this day is a picture of a Japanese soldier with a sword raised above his head, about to decapitate a Chinese a civilian, right? So it was long and brutal. Uh, the Chinese were divided in that war. I mean, there was a tactical alliance between the communists and the KMT. But as soon as the end of the war came, you then had the Civil War. But clearly, the biggest piece was the U.S. pushing Japan back across the islands and taking the Pacific Ocean. We have the myth here that the atomic bombings ended the war against Japan. It's not true. I got the book right here. There's a book called Racing the Enemy, where a scholar who was then at Stanford had access to Japanese, Russian, and U.S. Archives. And on the one hand, as we knew before that, Eisenhower, Leahy, I mean, Stimson, who was Secretary of War, had advised Truman that the Japanese surrender could be arranged on terms acceptable to the United States. They knew it wasn't needed, right? The principal reasons for using the A-bombs were to bring the war to immediate end, so the U.S. wouldn't have to share influence with the Soviet Union and northern China, Manchuria, and Korea, things that didn't work. And to, as Truman said, to have a hammer over those boys, meaning the Kremlin, to show them what we had and that we had the will to use it against people. But what you find in the archives is that on the one hand, communications with the bombings of Japan, what they were, communication between Hiroshima and Tokyo was not good. The leadership in Tokyo did not have a clear understanding of what had happened in Hiroshima. It was the Soviet decision on August the 8th, which is to say the night before the Nagasaki A bombing, the decision on the 8th to declare war on Japan, which led the emperor to insist that the war had to come to an end. But nonetheless, the war comes to an end. The U.S. had pushed Japan back to defeat already, and that ended the Japanese occupation of China. To this day, it's interesting. The Japanese had a totally brutal colonization of Korea, right? I mean, brutal, and there were actually quite a number of Korean A-bomb victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, been brought there as forced laborers, or some just came for work, right? And when those who had survived the A-bombing went back to Korea, they were anything but welcomed. I mean, they were in a desperate situation, many of them with radiation diseases and so on. No money. And for the mass of Korean people, the thought was that the A-bombs had ended Japanese colonization. So even to this day, the Koreans see the A-bombings in a different light than.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have a couple more questions, well, some other questions in chat. One, Brenda asked, do you think China will completely surpass the U.S. in economic power in the near future? Or do you think a future U.S. administration might correct the economic course our country seems to be on? My takeaway is that Brenda doesn't have a lot of faith in the current administration towards changing it.
Yeah. So as I showed in that one slide, depending on how you measure it, in some measurements, China's already exceeded the United States. I mean, their gross domestic product is a third greater or a quarter greater than that of the United States. But it's a vastly larger society, and so that means that individual standard of living is not that of the United States. You also have considerable economic inequality in China, which is a source of obviously of tension. Um, and Trump is doing his best to mess up the U.S. economy and its foundations, right? And it's impossible to know what the situation is going to be 30 years from now. But we're going to go through a period of serious economic setbacks. Add to that the alienation of the United States from so many other countries, this is not the world I want for my kids and my grandkids.
Understand. So Andy has another question on a slightly different realm. Does China have free and open elections? As the sidebar, please say something positive about the USA.
No, China obviously does not have free and open elections. I'm not sure that we do either, but their system of control at the moment is rather greater than here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And Eugene had a question in the chat. Just wondering if you saw recent reporting on Chinese influence in local New York elections. How much effect do they actually have? And the question, a follow-up on that, do the U.S. and other countries do similarly? I'm having a hard time with that word.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had read the reports, and maybe like the Russians with Trump, the idea in part is to be influencing politicians or rising figures, who may have influence over the longer term. And yes, the United States has been doing this for decades. It's if you go back in terms of how Europe stayed in the West in the 50s and 60s, it was through the manipulation of elections, and the United States does this, all around the world. When I was becoming a Middle East expert back in ancient history, there was a former CIA agent, I think Wilbur Cleveland was his name, something like that. He'd been in charge of U.S. policy in Lebanon, and he describes driving his Cadillac up to Shimon's presidential palace with $500,000 in the trunk of his car. And that election was bought in such a heavy-handed way that it led to the first gasp of what became the Lebanese Civil War. The United States has been doing this. Imperial powers do it. I mean, this is not to bless it, and it just underlines the importance of working to defend the right to have free and fair elections.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I don't see any questions in chat. Does anybody in the room have a question? Ben does. Ben, you want to come up and take the microphone?
Joseph, thank you very much for coming to or speaking with us today. I have a question with regards to the Philippines. You brought up the Philippines a lot in your presentation, and a little bit level set. Let me lay out the question first. So, in the first Trump administration, the previous Filipino president Duterte, Trump, I guess, alienated the Philippines a little bit, and the Philippines under Duterte seemed to be mending their relationship with China. Right. And then now we have a new president in the Philippines, Marcos, right? Marcos Jr., who most people forget is the son of the previous Marcos, who the United States supported. And basically he was overthrown in a coup and had to run away to Hawaii with like billions of dollars that he hid in his palace. Right.
Like shoes.
And his wife and Imelda and like thousands of shoes or something like that. And so now Marcos Jr. is now back in power. The son of the dictator that the U.S. supported, and now the Filipino relationship with China is now strained again, right? So my question is this strained relationship simply a result of the current president, or is it more of a sentiment of perhaps the Filipino people? What would Filipino relationship be like if there was a different president in the Philippines? Filipino and Chinese relationship.
So let me go back in history to answer your question. I made reference to Jules Davids, who taught the U.S. diplomatic history. We learned much later that he was the principal author of JFK's, Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage. And in his lecture about the 1890s and the coming of the U.S. Imperial period, he described Subic Bay. This is a time, I'm going back in history here, but just to put it all in context, this he explained in the 1890s, those of us hadn't really thought much about that, that international trade took place by ship, and those ships were powered by coal. And in order for the U.S. to be able to get to the China market, it needed coaling stations, stepping stones between California and the China market. But for the most part, those islands had been taken by European colonial powers, and they were not about to give the U.S. access to them. And this, in turn, helps us to understand why the United States conquered the Philippines and Guam, Samoa, so they would have these coaling stations. And he described Subic Bay on the west coast of the Philippines as a perfect, deep, round harbor, perfect for U.S. steamships to come and get coal, and principal reason why we then conquered in a very, very brutal and racist war, conquered the Philippines. And then it was a colony of the United States until just after the Second World War, in a brief period of Japanese control. But I think it's helpful to understand the Philippines in some ways like we understand Central American nations. A very small oligarchy of families, largely with huge land control and interests. And among these families are the Marcoses, and less with a land base, but more of an urban base, the Dutertes. And so you had a situation in which there was competition between these two families. Duterte, who is an incredibly brutal figure, both in his rule in Davao, where there were lots of people who were killed by the police with his authorization. And then when Duterte came to national power, you had the killing of well over 10,000 people, ostensibly drug dealers. The police just give them free hand to kill whoever they wanted. And you had a situation in which, you go back to 1991, when the kind of nationalist movement and a couple of volcanic eruption kicked the U.S. bases out. The United States managed to buy its way back in under the Estrada government with the Visiting Forces Agreement, and negotiated, the increasing number of U.S. troops and bases, functional bases, back in the Philippines. When Duterte came to power, out of nationalist and maybe personal interest, he moved to align, to break with the United States and to align more deeply with China. By the end of his rule, he had turned back. He never kicked U.S. forces or bases out. And in his last year or so, we had again a renewed deepening relationship with the United States. All the reasons behind his alienation from China, I can't tell you. And then we have, catch this name, Bongbong Marcos, coming to power, with actually a younger Duterte as his vice president. Marcos has totally embraced the U.S. military, and I'll tell you, it's the presence of Chinese maritime ships, functionally warships, in what are obviously Philippine economic zone, has reinforced pressure toward defense being provided by the United States. It's worth reading, a good book worth reading. And where do I have it here? It's a recent memoir by Walden Bellow, who I think is one of the leading internationally recognized public intellectuals, opponent of dictatorship in Manila. He had to spend a number of years in exile here in the Isaiah here. It's the global battlefields by Walden Bellow, and he goes into some detail on that history of relations. I go back to my earlier slide in which I said the quotation from my professor to the effect that studying international relations is analogous to studying the rules of the game among mafia families. In some ways, China is more progressive than the United States. In some ways, not. But it's pursuing what it perceives to be its interests at the expense, in some cases, of other countries. Not always, but in some cases, certainly, it's been quite willing to press its control of the within the 9-dash line in violation of the United Nations Court of Arbitration's ruling, which said those claims don't have legitimacy. Again, going back to another slide that was there, there have been efforts by a number of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations countries, to try to negotiate a code of conduct for the South China Sea. And this is something that I think we need to support. It should be there to address the needs and interests of all of the countries that border on the South China Sea, China obviously included.
Thank you. I have one more question from Andy. He says, on a previous question, it was kind of an add-on to it, that he's wondering if you could say something positive about the USA, past or present. And I would add to that, whether it's related to China policy or not.
So something positive about the United States. Well, God knows, certainly the movement towards greater civil rights, movement towards greater equality, support for democratic process, certainly its economic development. But we need to recognize that the United States government has been at the center of an empire. And empires do things that are not in our interest. I came of age in the civil rights movement. The reality is, unfortunately, that racism is as American as apple pie. If you want to read about relations between the United States and Asian nations, you find that one of the sources of tension and even of driving Japanese militarism in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s were the exclusionary immigration policies. The history of anti-Asian racism is pretty deep in this country. So, I think, again, there's an interesting column in today's New York Times by Jamil Bowie, focusing on 5 words in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address about the self-evident reality of human equality, and how this is being opposed. But I think obviously the vision that has been a big part of the American experiment, we call it that, has been this vision, the possibility of human freedom and human equality. Not that the United States has necessarily lived up to it, but I think that's why the United States was respected internationally for a very long time, and it's part of what's being sacrificed and lost in these Trump years. And ultimately, I think that's what this political struggle is about. Do we recognize the innate equality and rights of all people, or do we believe in a kind of a racist hierarchy?
Okay, I have another question in the room here for you. Step up and take the microphone, please. Oh, the microphone, right? The microphone.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Just the camera. If you're talking to the camera, we'll see your
Okay, great.
face.
Yeah, great. Yeah, hi. Thank you for your talk. It's great. Very good. And you mentioned just in the last remarks about the US being somewhat like an empire, very much like an empire, especially in the Pacific area. And I'd like to recommend a book to everyone. And you've probably already seen it. It's written by a historian. It's called How to Hide an Empire. And it's an amazing description of U.S. policy, particularly in the Philippines. And you know, 3 of my 4 grandchildren are half Philippine. So I have an interest in this area.
And
But
speaking of the book,
yeah, we have the speaker coming to talk to us, or what?
no, but he was just also showed us the book cover.
You've got it. Oh, I didn't see that. That's great. Yeah, it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. And it seems to be, I think, fairly objective. I mean, it does not tell a glorious story about United States history. But let's face it, it's history. And as you pointed out, it's motivated by trade, okay? And we all love foreign trade. We all love to be tourists ourselves in foreign countries, and we buy the trinkets and the souvenirs and stuff and bring them home. But on a larger scale, trade, for example, started the Opium Wars. Delano was an owner of a ship or a series of ships, and he began the American trade to China to make money from selling opium, from buying opium in China, putting it into India and so on. And the British East India Company did the same thing. So our reputation in the Pacific area is very much like Britain's reputation in India. And you should read a book. It's great, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just to say, it is an excellent book. Just 2 points to make. One of the things I found really quite remarkable in the book was the imperial dimension of the angle of a screw. And so after the Second World War, as new trade agreements were being put in place with Europe, the insistence was that the angle of a thread within a screw had to meet U.S. regulations, which meant in turn that Europe had to make its machinery compatible with that of the United States and therefore accessible to the U.S. economy. The other, just to say, is that the empire has not been limited to the Asia Pacific. We're seeing it play out yet again in the Middle East. And beginning in '56, with the British and French overextension and the invasion of Sinai by Israel at their behest, Eisenhower basically said, "Game over, it's ours." And what we're seeing here is, 70 years on, increasing challenges to that system, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't see any more. Well, one more question in the room, and then I think we need to. You have a grandson to get to college, right?
Yes, this is true.
And please make it a question.
Okay.
So if you could pick up the microphone.
Thank you for sharing your encyclopedic knowledge with us. My question is around the Thucydides trap, and it cannot be too short, but I'll try to make it short, like you said, Don. My searing, most troublesome memory of my childhood growing up in India as a 10-year-old boy was when the Chinese attacked India in '62 or something. And it disrupted everything. It caused a lot of alarm, and it was a very sudden attack. We were not prepared for it, and it actually killed Jawaharlal Nehru in a way, because he got a heart attack very soon after that. My question about the Thucydides trap is this. And Modi visiting China recently is not going to mend any of that relationship overnight. because the relationship between America and India has been growing steadily for 30 years now. But America did not face the Thucydides trap. The Thucydides trap was only between neighbors, whether it was Sparta and Greece, England and France, England and Germany. Most of the time it was neighbors. As America rose, it did not ring alarm bells because there were no territorial disputes, etc. China is surrounded by 8 or 9 different countries. It shares borders with 8 or 9 different countries. Over the hundreds of the years and thousands of years, there has been territorial problems, like with India, the McMahon line, which the British demarcated between India and China, and they grabbed the Aksai Chin Peninsula. And now they want Arunachal Pradesh, which is in the northeast of India. My question is this: will the Thucydides trap be more applicable to only China and its surrounding nations, or will it be applicable to China and the United States?
So thank you for that question. And I was recently reading a kind of a history of U.S.-Indian relations, which went into some depth about the 62 war. So thank you for calling that to everyone's attention. I think the Thucydides traps transcends neighbors, right? I mean, we had at the beginning of the 20th century one of the few times when the Thucydides trap did not lead to, it both did and didn't lead to a war. So you had, the U.S. challenging British hegemony, right? And the British elite understood that it was not in their interest to fight the U.S. over it. And it was in many ways diplomatically transferred to the United States, the 1890s and on. So you have that. But, I think if we look at the U.S. wars against Japan and Germany, both of which were rising powers in 1914, and for Japan in 1930s to 45, it did indeed lead to catastrophic war. I think the fear here is that the U.S.-Chinese relationship could trigger absolute catastrophe. And as I said before, the primary hinge is around Taiwan. If we go to war, maybe by accident or miscalculation, that could lead to the end of the human species. We need to understand just how deep and dangerous that is. Secondarily, you have the tensions, the possibility for accidents, miscalculations in the South China Sea, where the U.S. and NATO countries, among others, other Asian countries, are conducting their military exercises in close proximity with Chinese, and again, we could end up in a unintended escalation. You remember way back when. The earliest days of the Bush Jr. Administration, when a U.S. spy plane being challenged by a Chinese fighter jet ended up taking down there was a collision. The U.S. plane went down. We had an intense confrontation with China at that point, which only was de-escalated because of the 9/11 attack and the Bush administration's understanding that it just had to de-escalate the tensions with China and focus on bin Laden.
I don't see any other questions. I want to thank you very much, Joseph, for a very interesting and thoughtful presentation. Gave us a lot to think about.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for your patience. And I hope that the winds will blow me back to the capital region, and hope to meet some of you in the future.
We'll look forward to it. And I want to thank Ben also for suggesting helping you come to talk to us virtually. And have a good enjoy your trip to put your grandson to school.
Thank you.